joining me Tuesday Spark. Listen, information and inspiration, insight is what Tuesday Spark is all about. I'm not trying to tell you what to think. I'm just trying to get you to think. Remember, words are powerful. It only takes a spark to start a fire. So let's spark it up. Thank you again for joining me tonight. Listen, for a moment, I want you to subscribe to the YouTube page under the Village Church DC. Take an opportunity tonight to subscribe so you'll be the first to know when something new comes out that I'm saying or doing with Tuesday Spark. You will be the first to know. And also befriend me on my Facebook page, which is under Lewis Thomas Tait Jr. I'd love to be your friend and love for you to keep up with what I am doing. So tonight I want to talk about sort of like a part 2 from last week, but this is entitled Decolonized Mind. A decolonized mind. So for a moment, this short review. So what does it mean to have a colonized mind? The clue is in the language of a colonized mind person to help you to understand. If you just listen to how people talk about others and how they talk about themselves, just listen for a moment how sometimes people who have been oppressed talk about each other, and then how they talk about the oppressor in sometimes glowing terms. Or I saw an example of cars being driven up to a building, office building, and there was a sort of a concierge out front to take the cars, and all of them had nice cars. When a white man drove up there, a group of young men on the side was saying, yeah, he must, he's probably the CEO, he's probably well educated. And then there was an Asian guy that drew up and, he drove up and constantly came and get his car, and the same group of young men on the side, start talking about, he probably, he's Korean, or if he probably owns everything in the city, blah, blah, this and the other. So an African-American man drove a very nice car. When he got out, he had a suit on. He was dressed like he was, very professional. And what they said, these were African-American young men talking about another African-American man that they did not know, but their observations were that he must be a drug dealer. He must be, I'm going to take a picture of his car because he got to be dealing drugs. See, that's the kind of colonized mind. When you automatically assume the negative about your own people, and not knowing some of the biggest drug dealers don't look like us. They have airplanes, and they are professional people who run huge drug operations that we never know who they are. And sometimes only people that we find out about are the little persons, little underlings who get busted. And so, but it's interesting, and it's sort of, when you have a colonized mind, it's sort of complicated, because colonialism was such a encompassing thing, and it just encompasses not just politics and economics, but a consciousness. Frantz Fanon and Paulo Freire, these are two names you need to remember. Frantz Fanon and Paulo Freire had provided us with some great insight on this. Fanon, he was a black man born in the French colony of Martinique, and became a world-renowned psychoanalyst and philosopher working in Algeria. He wrote in his book, The Wretched of the Earth, for a colonized people, the most essential value, because the most concrete, is first and foremost the land which will bring them bread and above all dignity. That's why land is so important. And most of the times when people have been colonized, their land has been taken from them, like the Native Americans, like Africans who've been forced to come here from their land. Fanon's study of psychology and sociology led him to a further conclusion that colonized people perpetrate their condition by striving to emulate the culture and ideas of their oppressors. He wrote, imperialism leaves behind germs of rot, which we must clinically detect and remove from our land and from our minds as well. It's very important, because sometimes when you have not sometimes, all the time, when your mind has been colonialized, we have these germs, if you will, these thoughts that we have to work to get out of. And sometimes we talk about them, but we still come back to sort of this model. If we're going to be great, it's got to be modeled after some white person or some white ideology. Paulo Freire, who's a Brazilian educator, is best known for his development of what might be called liberation literacy, teaching literacy and political awareness together. In Paulo Freire, his famous book is Pedagogy of the Oppressed, he said this: the oppressed want at any cost to resemble the oppressor. He said the oppressed must be their own example. Think about that. That means you got to understand who you are as a person, your own age. You got to be your own example. Unlike Fanon, he argued that the oppressors also could, and those who wanted to end colonialism must change their own thinking. Those who authentically commit themselves to the people must re-examine constantly. And what he's saying is, if the oppressors really want to change, they have to be willing to change, and they have to authentically commit themselves to the people and must constantly re-examine themselves. You know, I just finished watching sort of a biopic about Aretha Franklin, and what struck me about her, with all the tragedy that she went through, and it was very emotional for me because she went through a lot, but she had a way of being her own woman. You know, even with the difficulties of her life, of a very sort of domineering father, and her first husband who was abusive and also domineering, but and also the people sometimes who handled her in the music business. At some point, she had to sort of bring it out of herself that this is who I am. I'm Aretha, and I will control my own destiny. So decolonizing the mind involves deconstructing hierarchies that favor the West. That means any systems that favor a sort of a Western European way, an American way of living practically every facet of life. This, of course, is easier said than done, given the embeddedness of the colonial mind in every fabric of today's world, and the internalization of colonial mentalities in both the colonializer and the colonialized. Think about it. Just when you think about even beauty, sometimes your standard for beauty, or who's intelligent, what comes to your mind? What do you think about? And why do you think those thoughts? And even when you're with people who are the colonializers, and they say that they are making a change, you still have to check them at times, because it's easy for them to fall back into those same sort of mentalities. You watch anytime you are working in close contact with white people, European folks, and you're supposed to be a leader. They have to push back from always trying to be paternalistic, trying to control the narrative. Primarily, deconstructing the colonial mind means deconstructing sort of these binaries of desirable and undesirable, attractive and unattractive, civilized and uncivilized, etc. Because who says, if this is what civilized is, where we're living in America, with how our judicial system works, with how our housing sort of system works, with how the penal system works, the industrial complex, we call it, how our politics work, how people now are putting all these states have all these voter suppression laws and pushing them off on us as if they're really good. Think about that. So when you have these, to deconstruct your colonial mind means deconstructing these kind of binary things: desirable, undesirable, attractive, unattractive, and it takes work. And listen, individuals around the world in a variety of sectors are working consciously and unconsciously to get this done. Similarly, as I mentioned last week, Natural Hair Movement encourages black men and black women to embrace their natural hair and resist standards set by white Eurocentric viewpoints. The movement continues today, challenging employers and individuals to rethink what hairstyles are professional and acceptable, where these standards originate. In other words, embracing and appreciating non-white beauty is an act of resistance against the colonial mentality. And you see this more and more amongst particularly African-American people and other ethnic groups, where they are wearing their hair, they're wearing their clothes, things that reflect who they are, their cultural distinctiveness. And you think how beautiful it is. But for it's still in some places, and even some, particularly African Americans, would tell young ladies that doesn't look professional. So my question is, what is professional? Now we're not talking you going to work and you got Daisy Dukes on, or you showing everything. No, we're just talking about you are dressed very nicely, but your hair is natural, and someone will tell you that's not professional. Decolonize our minds means considering what we consider to be common sense. That's another thing. What is common sense? In colonial, the colonial mentality produces this thing in us that we, particularly as African American people in this country, we always have this, as W.B. Du Bois, this two-ness, this twain going on us. We, on one hand we're American, on the other hand we're African, and we always have this fight going on with us. So you in order to decolonize your mind, I think it's something keen that Prince said in his song, is that you have to be aware of what's going on around you. You have to understand, forms of fascism. And you have to understand when people are telling you things are changing when they really haven't changed. You have to decolonize your mind. You have to understand when the persons who are part of the dominant culture are making all the laws under which the colonized fall. We got to understand what is really happening. And one thing he says, without God, it's just the blind leading the blind. And so that's important to understand too. To decolonize your mind, you have to have a sense of spirituality. However you understand God, a sense of understanding you are created in the image of this God. And there's nothing inferior about you. You have to think of yourself in ways in which that promote that godness in you, that person that people want to perhaps shut out. When you have a decolonized mind, you will no longer think of yourself as less than anybody. You will no longer sort of have this self-loathing, self-hatred kind of thing. You would not aspire to be like people who have historically dominated and oppressed you. You would aspire to be your best authentic self. So I want you to think about that this evening, about decolonizing your mind. It's a trip, but you can take it. Have a great evening.